Benjamin and Miles had shared ropes, chalked hands, and countless sunrises on cliff faces for years. They weren't just climbing partners. They were brothers in spirit, bound by the same hunger for summits and the quiet pride that comes from standing where few have stood before. But their bold attempt on Yosemite's El Capitan ended in a mystery that consumed friends, family, and rescuers alike. They vanished into that rugged wilderness, leaving behind only an abandoned campsite, eerily preserved. Sleeping bags unzipped, cooking gear untouched, as though they had simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. 3 long years passed before that silence shattered. What began as a peaceful morning hike turned into a nightmare when a curious dog uncovered something no one was ready to see. The fog was still clinging to the granite face of El Capitan when Riley Patel tightened the straps on their weathered backpack. Their German shepherd, Ranger, was restless. Ears pricked, muscles tense, as if the mountain itself had whispered to him. They had walked this trail in Yosemite countless times, but this morning Riley was running late for their shift at the visitor center. Taking the main route would mean adding nearly 40 minutes. "All right, boy, shortcut it is," Riley murmured, unclipping Ranger's leash. The dog was loyal, never straying far. Yet today he darted ahead with unusual purpose, weaving through pine trunks toward a slope choked with loose rock and ancient boulders. Last winter's rains had carved scars into this hillside, triggering landslides that left the ground treacherous. But locals knew, if you were careful, you could pass. Ranger disappeared between 2 massive slabs of granite, his black and tan coat flashing in and out of the dim light. A bark cut through the morning stillness, sharp, urgent. Then another, more insistent. Riley's heart kicked up. Scrambling over the carcass of a fallen pine, Riley found him pawing at a boulder split wide like a cracked egg, its fissure narrowing into blackness. Ranger's stance was rigid, tail straight, body vibrating with the intensity of his training. His nose had failed him only in the eyes of the police academy that deemed him too friendly for service. But his scent work was unmatched. "What is it, boy?" Riley muttered, crouching. They began clearing away loose debris with a stick, expecting perhaps a hiker's lost gear. But Ranger would not move, his low whine threaded with urgency. Riley pulled out their phone, flicked on the flashlight, and angled the beam into the gap. The light struck something pale against the granite. Not fabric, no, it was bone. A rib cage draped in the remnants of a faded blue jacket. Riley's stomach dropped, cold rushing up their spine. The phone nearly slipped from their hands as they dialed 911. 200 miles south in Fresno, Vera Wilder was flipping through invoices for her small catering business when the doorbell chimed. It was too early for deliveries. Through the peephole, she saw Sheriff Boyd Tanner, an old face, familiar yet shadowed now with something heavy. The sheriff didn't visit for good news. Vera opened the door without a word. His hand twisted the brim of his hat, a gesture she'd known since high school. "It's about Benjamin, isn't it?" Her voice was flat, almost rehearsed. 3 years of waiting had carved out a quiet readiness for this moment, though her pulse betrayed her. Boyd's eyes softened. "We found remains near El Capitan this morning. A hiker's dog came across them in a boulder field." Vera's knees weakened. "Is it?" "We can't confirm yet. There was climbing gear with the body. Dental records will take a day or 2, but—" He hesitated. "The equipment matches what Miles Reeves was wearing when he disappeared." Miles, not Benjamin. Relief and grief tangled in her chest until she couldn't tell one from the other. Miles had been Benjamin's shadow for years, his partner in climbs, his co-conspirator in every adventure, the man who would have followed him anywhere, even into danger. "Just Miles?" she asked quietly. "So far, the area's been unstable since the slides. We'll search thoroughly now that it's open again." Vera nodded, mind slipping back to the morning Benjamin had last stood in her doorway, dropping off his spare car keys, always a habit before a climb. His grin had been boyish, the kind that made him look younger than his 24 years. "We'll be back Sunday night," he'd promised, "and Miles wants to try that new Thai place." But Sunday came and went. Monday, too. By Tuesday, she was calling rangers. Search teams scoured the mountain, finding only their camp, eerily untouched, as if the men had been swallowed by the granite itself. Boyd's voice cut into her memory. "I'd like you to come to the site. Investigators may need help identifying personal items." She grabbed her jacket and keys, letting muscle memory guide her. The drive to Yosemite was 2 hours of shifting landscapes. Valley fields giving way to rolling foothills, then the Cathedral of Pines. Every mile brought back 100 memories of picking Benjamin up after climbs, sunburned, exhausted, but shining with the glow of accomplishment. At the ranger station, Boyd transferred her into a parked vehicle better suited for the rocky trail. As they bounced along, El Capitan rose in the distance, sunlight blazing across its massive face. The scene was larger than she imagined. Yellow tape strung wide across a chaotic sea of stone, investigators combing the boulder field with slow, deliberate movements. Cameras clicked, evidence bags filled. A young ranger stood with his German shepherd at his side, his expression still pale from whatever he had seen. Boyd led her to a pop-up tent where labeled bags were being cataloged. "This is Vera Wilder," he said to a woman with graying hair pulled into a severe bun. "Benjamin Wilder's sister." The woman's gaze softened. "I'm Lieutenant Chen. Thank you for coming. We've recovered several items that may help us identify the remains." Lieutenant Chen guided Vera toward a long folding table where a neat row of evidence bags rested beneath the pale light filtering through the tent walls. Inside one bag lay a faded blue jacket, its shoulder torn and frayed. Another contained a climbing harness, once bright red, now dulled and dust-stained from years in the elements. A third held a wallet, warped from water damage but miraculously intact. Vera's hands hesitated before lifting the wallet bag. Through the cloudy plastic, the familiar grin of Miles Andrew Reeves looked back at her, his dark hair falling stubbornly across his forehead just as it had in life. "That's Miles," she said, voice steady despite the swell of grief pushing against her ribs. "That harness, he had it custom-made in Denver. These are all his things." Chen nodded, jotting notes with calm precision. "The condition of the remains is consistent with a fall, possibly triggered by a rock slide. We'll know more after the examination." Vera's eyes flickered with both fear and hope. "What about Benjamin? Are you still searching for him?" Chen's voice softened. "We have teams combing the entire area. If he's here, we'll find him." Then, more carefully, "I know you've been through this before, but is there anything about their plans that day you haven't shared? Any particular route they mentioned?" Vera closed her eyes. Memories pressed forward. Benjamin scrawled notes, sketches of cliff faces, scribbled weather patterns. He kept a climbing journal. It's at his apartment. My apartment now. Her voice faltered. "I never had the heart to clear it out. I paid his rent for 6 months before I accepted he wasn't coming back. Then I moved his things into the spare room." "That could help narrow the search," Chen replied. Before Vera could answer, movement on the trail above caught her attention. A rider on horseback descended toward them, his silhouette framed by the rugged slope. Behind him, a small herd of cattle navigated the narrow path, their hooves clattering against stone. The man was older, mid-50s perhaps, with sun-hardened skin and the steady posture of someone who'd spent his life in the saddle. His tan Stetson shaded a pair of watchful gray eyes. A work shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, revealed forearms corded with muscle. "Afternoon, Vernon," Boyd greeted as the rider reached the clearing. Vernon tipped his hat and swung down from the saddle in one fluid motion. His gaze swept the scene, lingering on the evidence tent, the investigators pacing the boulder field, and the yellow tape rippling in the breeze. "Heard helicopters overhead this morning," Vernon said, his voice carrying the slow gravity of concern. "Something serious?" "Afraid so," Boyd replied. "A hiker's dog found human remains. Looks like one of the missing climbers from a few years back. Vernon's expression tightened. He removed his hat, revealing hair streaked with silver. The two young men? I remember that search. A terrible thing. Boyd motioned toward Vera. This is Vera Wilder. Her brother Benjamin was one of them. Vernon stepped forward, extending a broad, calloused hand. Vernon Hartley. I own the ranch bordering this side of the park. I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Wilder. His handshake was firm, his eyes meeting hers with a steadiness that felt both respectful and probing. Thank you, Vera said softly. This the same area we searched 3 years ago? Vernon asked. Close enough, Boyd said. But the landslides have changed the terrain completely. That was a brutal winter, Vernon agreed, his gaze tracking the slow movement of investigators. My ranch hands know every deer path, every water source in these hills. If you need extra eyes, you've got them. Chen had stepped forward. We appreciate that, Mr. Hartley. Local knowledge can be invaluable. I've got 6 men working for me now, Vernon said. Every one of them knows this terrain. We can cover ground your teams might miss. He glanced at Vera. Your brother, Benjamin, right? Blonde, fit, outdoorsy. I remember those posters. That's him, Vera confirmed, surprised by the specificity. How old was he? 24 when he disappeared. No family back home. Wife, kids. Sometimes young men that age. Vernon let the sentence hang. They walk away from their responsibilities. The question sat strangely with Vera, but she answered anyway. Number climbing was his life. He was single, no children. So, no reason to just disappear voluntarily, Vernon mused. Boyd's jaw tightened. We ruled that out early. These two were skilled, but they weren't careless. Something happened up there. Vernon replaced his hat. We run cattle through the high country all season. If there's anything to find, we'll spot it. His gaze held Vera's. Where was your brother from originally? Fresno, but he spent every free moment in the mountains. And you? Do you climb? Vera shook her head. That was Benjamin's world. I keep my feet on the ground. Vernon's mouth curved into a faint smile. Smart. These mountains are beautiful, but they don't forgive mistakes. He gathered his reins. I'd better keep these cattle moving. Boyd, you've got my number. Call if you want those extra searchers. Mounting his horse with practiced grace, Vernon looked down at Vera. Miss Wilder, I hope you find your brother. No one should have to spend their life wondering what happened to family. He guided the horse toward the trail, the herd following in his wake, their bells fading into the vast stillness of the mountains. Vernon touched the brim of his hat, a subtle nod of respect, before clicking his tongue. His horse responded instantly, stepping forward with calm obedience as the cattle fell in line behind him. From where she stood, Vera watched the quiet skill with which he guided the animals around the investigation site without needing to be told. The man moved like someone who had spent a lifetime reading the land and its moods. Good man, Vernon Hartley. Boyd said once the rancher was out of earshot. Runs the largest spread in the county, 3,000 acres, all of it bordering the park. If there's anyone who knows these mountains better than the rangers, it's him. Lieutenant Chen scribbled a note. Local support like his could be invaluable. He's been here for 40 years, knows this terrain inside and out. Former Army Corps of Engineers, too. He's got the kind of logistical mind that can keep an operation running in the toughest conditions. If anyone can help find your brother, it's him. They remained at the scene for another hour. Vera answered questions about Benjamin and Miles, their climbing history, the kind of gear they preferred, the routes they favored, the rhythms they kept on expedition. The sun slid lower, spilling golden light across El Capitan's face, until Boyd suggested it was time to head back. The ride to Fresno was quiet. Vera watched the forest and granite blur past her window, her mind wandering to Miles's parents in Oregon. They had spent 3 years in the same darkness she had, clinging to hope in the absence of answers. Now, at least, they would have something, though closure was rarely as healing as people pretended it to be. When Boyd pulled into her driveway, he rested his hands on the wheel. Try to get some rest. We'll call you as soon as we know more. And Vera, that climbing journal you mentioned, it might help. I'll look for it tonight, she promised. But sleep never came. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Miles's water-warped driver's license, Benjamin's abandoned tent in the clearing. By dawn, she gave up and sat in the kitchen with coffee, the first thin light creeping across the valley. She needed to act. If the search was starting again, the sheriff's department would need updated photos of Benjamin. The flyers she'd made 3 years ago were hasty, smudged copies from a 24-hour print shop, born out of panic, not planning. This time, she would do it right. Benjamin's room was exactly as he had left it. The faint scent of him lingered. Sunscreen, climbing chalk, and the cedar sachets their mother used to tuck into drawers. At his desk, she began searching for the envelope of photos from his last trip to Joshua Tree. Pens lay scattered across the surface. A half-eaten protein bar sat beside a stack of papers. His drawers were crammed with receipts, scraps of paper, and crumpled topo maps. Benjamin had never been orderly, except when it came to charting climbing routes. She pulled out a manila folder labeled Work Stuff in his looping handwriting. Inside were pay stubs from a patchwork of jobs, construction sites, warehouses, seasonal retail. He and Miles had perfected the art of working just enough to finance the next adventure. 3 pay stubs caught her attention. They were paper-clipped together, all from the same place, Hartley Ranch. The most recent was dated September 15th, just 18 days before Benjamin disappeared. $1,200 for fence repair and general labor, paid in cash. 2 more stubs showed similar work in late August and early September. Each bore the same crisp signature, Vernon Hartley. Vera sat back in her chair, the pay stub spread out beside Benjamin's journal. Her brother had worked for Vernon for at least a month before vanishing. And yet, when they'd met yesterday, Vernon had shaken her hand, offered help, asked questions, without mentioning he had ever employed Benjamin. Maybe he simply forgot. He had said he currently employed 6 men. Over the years, dozens must have passed through. Seasonal workers, drifters, climbers picking up extra cash. But Vernon had remembered Benjamin was blonde, fit, and outdoorsy. That kind of memory didn't align with complete forgetfulness. She found the photos she was looking for, along with a few more. Benjamin grinning at the summit of Half Dome. Benjamin and Miles at camp, headlamps glowing like halos in the dusk. A shaky video from Benjamin's old phone showing them practicing moves on a boulder while Miles narrated in mock documentary style. In every image, they were impossibly young, radiating a joy that made her chest ache. At the print shop, she ordered crisp, high-quality flyers, then drove to Yosemite Village. The climbing shop buzzed with weekend visitors. The owner, Derek, recognized her instantly. He had been part of the original search. "I heard about the recovery," he said quietly. "I'm so sorry." "Thanks. They're still looking for Benjamin." She handed him a flyer. "Can I put one up?" "Of course." He cleared space on the bulletin board. "You know, I always wondered if they might have taken a different route that day. Benjamin was talking about the East Buttress when he came in for gear that week. Did he say anything else? Mention anyone? Not Benjamin, but Miles asked about approaches from the valley floor versus coming in from the high country. Said a rancher had shown them a shortcut through private land. Vera's chest tightened. A rancher? Yeah, they'd been working out that way, doing fence repair or something. The rancher told them about an old trail that cut an hour off the approach. "Do you know which ranch?" "Number, but there are only a few big operations along the park's edge. Hartley's is the largest." Vera thanked him and went straight to the ranger station. Kim, the young ranger on duty, pulled up the original missing persons report. "We interviewed everyone who saw them that week," Kim said, frowning at the screen. "There's no mention of them working in the area. We assumed they drove straight from Fresno." "They were working at Hartley Ranch," Vera said. "I have the pay stubs." Kim's brow furrowed. "That should have come up in the investigation. Hartley was part of the search coordination. If they were his employees, he would have known. Maybe it slipped his mind, Vera offered, though the words felt thin. Maybe, Kim said slowly. But Vernon's sharp. Former military. Runs that ranch like a precision operation. Forgetting something like that doesn't fit. Driving home, Vera couldn't shake the thought. It wasn't just the omission. It was the way Vernon had asked his questions, gathering information while cloaked in neighborly concern. The way he'd shown a pointed interest in Benjamin's age, relationship status, background. She thought of Benjamin's journal entry. Vernon seems like a decent boss. Present tense. Benjamin had worked for him, trusted him enough to take trail advice, and yet, standing in front of her yesterday, Vernon had acted as if he had only seen Benjamin's face on a missing poster. That night, Vera spread the pay stubs, journal photos, and notes across her dining table. The facts were clear. Her brother and Miles had worked for Vernon Hartley. And Vernon hadn't told a soul. Vernon had stood in front of her, asking personal questions about Benjamin, his age, his relationships, his past, while claiming he knew him only from search posters. It wasn't proof of anything. It was just odd. But as Vera traced her brother's handwriting in the journal, the unease settled deeper into her bones. She couldn't shake the suspicion that Vernon Hartley was holding back far more than he let on. 3 days passed before she made her decision. In that time, she threw herself into the expanded search effort, helping coordinate teams combing the slopes where Miles had been found. The mountain gave up no further clues. Chen remained cautiously optimistic. This kind of search could take weeks. The landslides had reshaped the landscape in unpredictable ways, covering old evidence, revealing new hazards. Still, Vera felt time slipping away. Maybe if she went to Vernon directly, showed him what she'd found, he might remember something. A detail about Benjamin's mood, an argument with another worker, some hint about that October day. The road to Hartley Ranch wound through 20 miles of mountain country, the kind of drive where the radio faded and the world seemed to narrow to asphalt and trees. She'd looked up the property online. 3,000 acres of prime grazing land, established in 1963. The images showed rolling pastures under a vast sky, neat outbuildings, and a sprawling ranch house wrapped in porches. Stone pillars marked the entrance, a black iron arch, overhead bearing the Hartley brand. Vera turned down the gravel drive, passing cattle grazing in the soft morning light. The main house stood on a rise, watching the valley and the mountains beyond like a sentinel. She parked, climbed the steps, and rang the doorbell. The sound echoed inside. No answer. She rang again. Nothing. Circling to the back porch, she found a view of a fenced garden and an old bunkhouse, weathered wood, likely original to the property. Still no sign of life. It was past 10. Surely someone should be working. She returned to her car, debating. She'd come this far. Leaving without at least finding Vernon felt like retreat. Following a dirt track deeper into the property, she passed sheds and a large, clean barn. The place was immaculate. Equipment lined up in perfect rows, paint fresh, fences straight. Even here, far from the road, Hartley's pride in the ranch was obvious. A narrow spur road drew her toward a cluster of older buildings. It wound through pines and opened into a clearing. There, beside a low concrete structure built into a hillside, was Vernon's dark blue Ford F-350. The same truck she'd seen at the investigation site. The building was older than the truck, older than most of the ranch. Thick concrete walls, a heavy metal door, the kind of construction that didn't belong to a simple root cellar. Fresh tire tracks ringed the area, their edges crisp in the dirt. Someone had been here recently. Very recently. Vera parked a careful distance away. "Mr. Hartley," she called, "it's Vera Wilder." Her voice sounded small against the stillness. No answer. As she approached, the details sharpened. Ventilation pipes jutted from the hillside above. The door was newer than the structure, industrial grade with multiple locks. A security camera, its red light blinking, sat high on a nearby pole. She walked slowly around the building, noting its weathered solidity. Small, high windows had been covered with metal plates. The design reminded her of Cold War-era bunkers she'd seen in documentaries, structures built to keep something out, or in. A faint sound halted her steps. It was muffled, swallowed by concrete. Machinery, maybe. A generator. She checked her phone. No signal, not unusual this far into the mountains. She decided to wait a few minutes in case Vernon emerged. Leaning against her car, she studied the structure. What would a cattle ranch need with such a fortified building? Maybe it was part of the property's history, old storage from another era. The sound came again, louder this time. Vera straightened. It wasn't machinery. It was a voice. Her pulse kicked. She moved closer, feet crunching softly on gravel. Near the door, a ground-level ventilation grate funneled the sound outward. She crouched beside it, holding her breath. "I told you about resisting." Vernon's voice, firm but not furious. The tone of someone dealing with a difficult animal. 3 years and you still haven't learned. Then, metal, the rattle of chains scraping against concrete. "Please," another voice. Male, weak, hoarse. I can't anymore." "You need to accept this is your life now," Vernon replied, matter of fact. "Fighting only makes it harder." The man began to sob. Deep, hollow sounds that carried the weight of years without freedom. "Stop that," Vernon's voice snapped, the edge of authority now sharp. "Take your medicine, or no food again. You know the rules." "I'll take it," the man choked. "Just, please don't leave me here again. That depends entirely on you." Footsteps approached from inside, heavy and deliberate. Vera's body reacted before her mind caught up. She scrambled back, heart pounding in her ears. By the time she reached her car, she was fumbling for her keys, every muscle screaming to move. She started the engine, pulling away at a measured pace, forcing herself not to floor it despite the tremor in her hands. A mile from the ranch gate, she pulled over. Her fingers were stiff with adrenaline as she dug Sheriff Boyd Tanner's card from her purse and dialed his direct line. He answered on the third ring. "Boyd." "It's Vera," she said, her breath catching. "I was just at Hartley Ranch. He has someone locked inside a building. I heard him. I heard chains." "Slow down, Vera. Where are you now?" She gave her location and recounted everything. Vernon's truck, the bunker-like structure, the voices through the grate. Boyd was silent until she finished. "You're saying you heard Vernon talking to someone in that building?" "Not talking, controlling, threatening. And the person was chained." "Boyd, I heard the chains." "Vera." His voice took on that careful, measured quality, the one cops used when handling witnesses teetering on panic. "You've been under a lot of stress lately. You've just found Miles. The search has reopened. I know what I heard. I'm not saying you didn't. But Vernon Hartley is a respected man in this county. He's given more to the community than most people can imagine. He even paid for the new search and rescue gear last year. What you're describing, it could be something else." "Like what?" "Vernon's got an older brother with dementia. Sometimes patients need to be restrained for safety. Or maybe it was one of his ranch hands. Vernon's been known to help men get clean by keeping them away from alcohol or drugs." Boyd paused, his voice still calm. "But unless you saw someone actually being held against their will..." Boyd's voice was calm, almost too calm, as if his even tone could dull the edges of what Vera had just told him. "I can't get a warrant without probable cause. Vernon's got the same Fourth Amendment rights as anyone else." The words landed like a door slamming shut. "So you're not going to do anything?" she asked, her voice tight. "I'll make some discreet inquiries," he said, pausing long enough to make the caveat sting. "But you need to be careful with accusations. Vernon's well-connected. The district attorney plays poker with him every other Thursday. Without concrete evidence." Vera understood. Her word against Vernon Hartley's would vanish in the dust before it ever reached a judge's desk. "I understand," she said quietly. "Go home, rest. Keep your focus on the search for Benjamin. I promise. I'll look into it. Properly." The line went dead. For a long moment, Vera sat in the driver's seat, watching the ranch's stone pillars in her rearview mirror. No one followed. Vernon probably hadn't even seen her. But the memory of that voice through the vent, of chains clinking in the dark, burned in her mind like a brand. That night, she made her choice. In the garage, she dug out Benjamin's old camping gear. Among it was his trail camera, a motion-activated, infrared-capable device meant to catch shy wildlife at night. She held it in her hands like a lifeline. If Boyd needed proof, she would get it for him. At 2 a.m, dressed in dark clothes, she slipped out into the new moon's near-total darkness. The air was cool, heavy with pine. She'd memorized the property layout earlier that day and knew she could reach the bunker without headlights. The ranch's dirt roads unspooled before her in memory, each turn etched into her mind. Vernon Hartley might have money, respect, and friends in high places, but someone inside that bunker needed help. And until Vera knew for certain it wasn't Benjamin, she wasn't walking away. She parked 100 yards from the bunker, hidden behind a stand of pines. The truck wasn't there. Good. She could work fast. The concrete structure was just visible ahead, its bulk a deeper shadow against the hillside. A large pine 30 feet from the door would make a perfect vantage point. She had just begun strapping the camera in place when her flashlight beam caught a reflection through a rear window. She froze. The truck was back. When had it arrived? She hadn't heard an engine. Maybe it had never left. Her pulse kicked into overdrive. She forced herself to finish securing the camera, fingers trembling. Just one more strap, one quick adjustment. Movement in her peripheral vision made her glance toward the truck. The cab light was on. Through the glass, she saw scattered magazines, fitness publications with tanned, shirtless men on the covers. Her father's voice echoed from childhood, dripping with disapproval. Those kinds of magazines. On the dashboard sat a small bottle. She recognized it instantly. Poppers. The puzzle pieces locked into place in a way that made her stomach turn. Vernon's pointed curiosity about Benjamin's age, appearance, and relationships wasn't idle. "Couldn't leave well enough alone, could you?" Vera spun. Vernon was 10 feet away, emerging from the darkness without a sound. His stance was no longer the genial rancher. His posture was tight, forward, predatory. "I was just—" she began, but he moved before she could finish. His hand clamped over her mouth, the other locking around her waist. She bit down hard, tasting blood. He yanked his hand away, and she tore free, sprinting toward her car. Her phone was in her hand before she was even halfway there, thumb finding 911 on instinct. Boots pounded behind her. She dove into the driver's seat, locking the doors as the line rang. 911, what's your emergency? I'm at Hartley Ranch on Mountain Road. A crash cut her off. The driver's side window exploded inward, showering her in shards that glittered like ice. She screamed. Vernon's arm reached through, scrabbling for the lock. "Help! He's attacking me!" She yelled into the phone, trying to hold it out of his reach. "Send help!" The door flew open. He dragged her out by the hair, the phone tumbling into the dark. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the dispatcher calling her back. "You'll see your brother real soon," Vernon growled, pinning her arms. The zip ties were in his hand before she could fight. They bit into her wrists with practiced efficiency. Then she was lifted, hauled like dead weight, and thrown into the bed of his truck. Her head struck the metal, a burst of white pain sparking across her vision. The engine roared to life. Gravel spit from the tires. The trip was short. Too short. Headlights bathed the concrete structure as Vernon stopped. He yanked her out, half dragging her to the heavy metal door. Locks clicked in rapid succession, the sound coldly deliberate. The smell inside hit her like a physical blow. Sweat, waste, and air that hadn't been fresh in years. "Move," he ordered. The stairs descended into a room larger than she expected, lit by the sickly green of emergency bulbs. Shelves lined the walls, canned goods, water, medical supplies, survivalist stockpiles. But her eyes were pulled to the far corner. A figure lay on a cot, thin to the point of frailty, hair tangled and matted, bare-chested except for stained sweatpants. His ankle was shackled to a ring in the floor. Benjamin. The name left her in a whisper, escaping before she could stop it. His head turned slightly, eyes unfocused, cheeks hollow. For a moment she saw nothing of her brother in that face, until a flicker of something, faint and fragile, passed through his gaze. "Ben, it's me. It's Vera." His lips moved without sound. One skeletal hand lifted a few inches, reaching for something invisible. "Touching reunion," Vernon said behind her. He pulled another length of chain from a shelf. "Don't worry. You'll have plenty of time to catch up." The shackle clamped around her ankle with a final, merciless click. 6 feet of chain. Enough to sit, not enough to reach her brother. "Ben," she tried again. "Can you hear me?" His eyes followed her voice, but the vacancy remained. His body was a map of his suffering. Jutting bones, ropey scars on his wrists, the slow, listless movements of someone whose hope had been methodically stripped away. "He can hear you," Vernon said, rearranging supplies. "He just doesn't talk much anymore." Vera's voice tore from her throat before she could temper it. "You sick bastard." It came out raw, unfiltered, a sound born from years of grief and the shock of what she was seeing. Vernon turned toward her with unsettling composure, as if she were a petulant child rather than a captive chained to his bunker wall. "I'm not the monster you think I am," he said evenly. "I've taken care of him, fed him, kept him clean, when he'd let me. I've given him books, music. It's not my fault he chose to be difficult." Her voice was shaking but sharp enough to cut. "You chained him in a bunker." "I saved him," Vernon replied, his tone shifting from calm to fiercely convinced. "Do you know what happens to pretty boys like him out there? The world would have chewed him up and spat him out. Here, he's safe, protected." Before Vera could answer, a low rumble reached them, faint but growing. Multiple engines. Vernon's gaze sharpened. His face went still. "You called them?" It wasn't a question. "They heard everything before you grabbed me," Vera said, her voice gaining strength. "Your name, the location, you attacking me." Vernon moved with sudden precision, pulling a rifle from a wall mount she hadn't noticed before. An AR-15, sleek and well-maintained. The kind ranchers claimed was for predators, but the way his hands fit around it told her this was no stranger to human targets. He checked the magazine with the fluidity of long habit. "Then we don't have much time. Vernon, think. It's over. Let us go. Cooperate and maybe—" "Maybe what?" His laugh was bitter, hollow. "Maybe I'll get 20 years instead of life. Maybe they'll lock me in protective custody so the other inmates don't tear apart the rich old queer who likes young men." His lip curled. "I've spent 40 years hiding. I'm not ending my life in a cage." The engines were closer now, surrounding them. Through the vents came the faint crackle of radios, then a voice amplified and unmistakable. "This is the Sheriff's Department," Boyd's voice boomed. "Vernon Hartley, we know you have Vera and Benjamin Wilder. Come out with your hands where we can see them." Vernon didn't move. He was still, calculating. The mind that had built an empire, concealed his nature, planned Benjamin's captivity with meticulous detail. "They'll use gas," he muttered. "Or breach charges. Either way, it'll be violent. He's too weak to handle it." He glanced at Benjamin. "Then let us go," Vera urged. "End it peacefully." "It was never going to end peacefully," Vernon said, his finger brushing the trigger guard. And then his voice changed. Colder, almost confessional. "Not since that friend of his walked into the bunkhouse. Miles, sanctimonious little prick. Threatened to call the cops. as if Benjamin hadn't been willing at first, as if he hadn't flirted back, taken my money gladly, until I misread the situation. Vernon's jaw tightened. One moment of bad judgment, and he turned it into a crime. I had no choice. I killed him quick and clean, more than he deserved for trying to ruin my life. Vernon's eyes softened when they fell back on Benjamin. But him, I couldn't hurt him. Even when he fought, when he tried to escape, when he starved himself, I loved him. That's not love, Vera spat. What would you know about it? His voice cracked, and something unguarded bled through. 40 years of hiding. 40 years of wanting what I could never touch, building all this while dying inside. Then he walks in, beautiful, free, everything I could never be. Above them, boots scraped on concrete. Vernon's head snapped up. "They're at the vents. Your sheriff called in SWAT," he said with a grim smile. "At least they're taking me seriously." "Please," Vera whispered, gesturing to Benjamin. "Look at what you've done. This isn't love. It's possession. It's destruction." "I kept him alive," Vernon shot back. "Fed him, bathed him, held him when the nightmares came. That's more than—" The lights went out. A second later, the dim green of emergency bulbs flared back on. But in that momentary darkness, Vera heard it. The sharp pop of breaching charges. Not at the door. Above, at the ventilation shaft. "No!" Vernon roared, swinging the rifle upward. A flashbang dropped through the vent like a comet. Vera had one breath to close her eyes, clamp her hands over her ears. Then white fire and deafening thunder swallowed the room. Even braced, the concussion staggered her. Vernon fired blindly upward, muzzle flashes painting the walls in strobing light. Brass casings clattered against concrete. Then black-armored bodies poured through the breach, rifles leveled, voices hard and urgent. "Drop the weapon, now!" Vernon turned the rifle toward them. Multiple triggers clicked, tasers, not bullets. He convulsed and collapsed, the weapon skittering away. "Clear! 3 civilians, 2 restrained!" Hands were on Vera, cutting the chain at her ankle, steadying her as she blinked against the afterimage. But her eyes sought only one thing: Benjamin, where medics swarmed, checking his vitals, inserting IVs. "Ma'am, Vera, you're safe." Lieutenant Chen's voice broke through the noise. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine. Benjamin, my brother. They're taking care of him, but we need to check you too." "He's been here 3 years," Vera said numbly. 3 years in chains. "I know," Chen said quietly. "We're getting you both out." They led her up the stairs into the blinding chaos of flashing lights and shouting voices. Vernon was already cuffed, being pushed into a patrol car. Without his dominance, he looked smaller, older. The helicopter ride to the trauma center blurred together. Vera sat beside Benjamin's stretcher, his skeletal hand in hers. He didn't speak, didn't react, but when her thumb brushed over his knuckles, his fingers twitched, curling faintly around hers. "I'm here," she whispered over the roar. "You're safe now. I'm taking you home." 2 days later, the hospital room hummed with the soft beeps of monitors. Vera sat at Benjamin's bedside, watching him sleep. The doctors said his body was stable, malnourished, dehydrated, but healing. The mind would be harder. "He hasn't spoken," she asked quietly when Dr. Patricia Ningguan stepped in. "Not a word," the psychiatrist said, studying his chart. "He responds to simple commands, sometimes recognizes you. It's called selective mutism, common in severe trauma. The fact that he responds at all is promising." A knock at the door. Boyd entered with Chen close behind. "How's he doing?" Boyd asked. "Physically better," Vera said. "Has Vernon said anything?" They exchanged a look. "That's why we're here," Chen said, pulling out a notebook. "He's confessed everything." Vera's spine stiffened. Chen's voice stayed professional, but Vera could hear the disgust beneath. "Your brother and Miles came back to the ranch in early October to pick up gear. Vernon was drunk, made advances toward Benjamin. Benjamin refused. Miles walked in. Vernon shot him, point blank. Then he knocked Benjamin out, kept him sedated for 3 days while he disposed of Miles's body. "The rock slide," Vera murmured. Boyd nodded. 20 years in the Army Corps of Engineers. He knew exactly how to make it look natural. Buried Miles first, then used old explosives to trigger the slide. Chen went on. He called it love. Classic delusional possession. He admitted to 7 other assaults over 15 years. Young men, seasonal workers, no local ties. Paid them off to disappear. But Benjamin was different. Special, he said. Since the story broke, more victims had come forward. What happens to him now? Vera asked. Murder, kidnapping, false imprisonment, sexual assault, attempted murder of a police officer. The list is long, Boyd said. He'll never see daylight again. Boyd's eyes dropped. Vera, I owe you an apology. When you called about hearing someone in that bunker, I should have listened. You couldn't have known, she said. Maybe, but if you hadn't gone back with that camera. She saved his life, Dr. Ningguan said. Another year, maybe less, and his body would have failed. When they left, Vera sat in silence, Benjamin's thin hand cradled in hers. His eyes opened, fixed on the ceiling. Then, so soft she almost missed it. Miles, her breath caught. 3 years, and this was his first word. He's gone, Ben, she whispered. I'm so sorry. His eyes closed. A single tear slid down his cheek, but his hand tightened around hers, faint but steady. It was a beginning.